Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Jackson, we were only 7 seconds apart this time. I think this is the closest that we beamed in exactly at the right time.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
Well, I woke up with an amazing vision this morning. And it's really, I think I've been thinking about it all morning here, trying to, anticipating our discussing it. So I'm excited about today.
Well, you notice I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything.
You're just waiting. You don't have anything. Okay, so you're okay if we just dive right in.
My heart rate just went up an average of 25 points a minute.
And you've already been on the Vasper. That's funny. Oh, that's funny. Well, it's been a culmination of thoughts over the last week, and then a couple of really interesting observations. Last night, sort of, early evening yesterday, my friend Dick Holland came over, and we were going to have dinner and watch a movie. We like to watch documentaries, and so the documentary we were going to watch, we found this documentary about Steve Madden, who is a very famous shoemaker. Excuse me. He was one of the key things in that movie, The Wolf of Wall Street. He was the company that they ended up getting in trouble. Or he ended up getting in trouble because Jordan Belfort used his company as kind of a shell for things. But it was a very fascinating thing. But that's not the point of this story. That Dick Holland is a 69-year-old man. He's been a good friend of mine for almost 15 years now. And this was a very interesting thing. We sat down and we got some grapes and we're all getting settled. And he is looking in his pocket and he couldn't find his phone. And it was literally, I got to go get my phone. I'll be back, right? And he got up to go out, to go home, 6 minutes away. It lives on the other side of the lake. Just 6 minutes away it will take him. But the sheer panic of the thought of being at the house here without the phone. And now maybe there's something, was waiting for something or needed to be in contact with somebody, but it just struck me as like, boy, that's really, now we know we're coming where it's like, I've been thinking about this as that it's like oxygen. Our oxygen tank is this, this phone. So he goes out to his car, but the phone was there in his car, so he didn't have to go all the way back to his house to get it. But just the thought that he was going to have to go home to get the phone to be able to breathe for the few hours that we were going to watch. We ended up watching 2 movies, but to spend like from 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock till 9 or 10 without this oxygen tank was really unsettling. And I thought,
yeah, it suggests you that there's a whole new for emergency medical services, there's a whole new procedure called digital mouth-to-mouth.
It's true, and it started.
You would have been forced throughout the evening to actually do digital Cloudlandia mouth-to-mouth, not mainland mouth.
And this is what. That was this is how it all ties together here to where we're, because it's all just this cascade of visualizations and realizations that started coming to me with this, that the truth is, we've talked about this migration to Cloudlandia, and that what I'm really seeing right now is that Cloudlandia is literally where the oxygen is. That's what we've got to be connected to Cloudlandia through our oxygen tank to feel like we're connected to the world. Our pulse is connected to our connection to Cloudlandia.
Yeah, well, here's, I'll give you the 100%, 180-degree position from that. So It just struck me, one thing I have to make sure I do Saturday night or early Sunday morning, if you're on the schedule for, our podcast, I say I got to make sure that my cell phone is charged up.
Okay? Right.
Okay,
yes.
So that's number one. That's the only time during the week when I have any concern about whether my cell phone is charged up. And then I said, it's really neat because it gets charged up every Sunday that we have a podcast. But the other thing is I never have to worry about having your number because I just go to recents.
Yes.
I said, there's no other number on recents except yours, there's just nothing else. So you have 100% monopolization of the function on my cell phone called recents. As a matter of fact, 95% of all minutes. So think extraordinarily useful, very special. It's an event that happens periodically throughout the year, and that's, as far as the cell phone goes, that's my experience of tapping into Cloudlandia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess Dick and I are on polar opposites.
Isn't it? I mean, it's really funny that when you think that through, the implications of that. It made sense that I had this visualization, of course, that we've slowly, and it's been a slow migration like that, it's been, over the last 20 years, it's been a slow point where the majority, and I think we've talked about on a previous conversation that the recent polls that find that, 80-something% of people consider themselves to be almost always online. And as how that number has grown, and how infrequently, how less than 5% of people are online less than once a day. And that's really, that really says it all. And I had this vision of that, this idea of deep work, that it's really got kind of to get some meaning here, that all the deep work is done in the mainland, right? Where we have to really focus ourselves. So it's almost really like being able to either hold your breath or be able to be without that Cloudlandia oxygen to be able to have deep periods of focus where you're not connected to that oxygen, that the frequency of that. And that's really it's really an amazing thing, because I look at it that, if you compare that level of I'm going to call it panic in a 70-year-old man about not being able to sit through 4 hours without the phone, and not unlike on the other end of that, Lupa's 10-year-old Philip is that's almost like the Wi-Fi is the it fits with the reallocation of Maslow's hierarchy to have battery power and Wi-Fi as the first two elements of the foundation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs before we get to food and shelter. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I think it is that we don't, I think it's just a natural instinct, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with digital capabilities, but I just came out with my newest quarterly book, which is called Capabilism. Yeah, and I think you're in your workshop on Tuesday, are you not? Or Tuesday, or are you the following Monday?
I arrive on Friday, this Friday at 8, and I meant to...
So we have lunch on Saturday.
The 9th, hopefully, yeah. That would be great.
Yeah, it's already scheduled.
Okay, good. And then my workshop is the following Thursday.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to check on that.
Oh, no. My workshop is actually in 2 weeks. My workshop is not until I have my breakthrough blueprint on the 11th, 12th, and 13th. And then, so for 21st would be my workshop.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Yeah. Okay, but then we do our Jacques Bistro.
Yes, I'm hoping we get 2 before I go to London. That'd be great.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that this is the next book, so you'll get it when you come. Or you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have Anna just fire we could send you the ebook right now, but I'll send you the actual book because ebook is kind of Cloudlandia version of my book, but the actual book is mainland. I'll send you the mainland version of the book.
That'd be great. Just have her send it to the Hazleton for me. Be great.
Yeah. Okay. And it's capabilism. So about 20 years ago, I've been a political, really student of politics for as long as I can remember, and it was very, very much influenced by my mother, and that she said that it was really important to pay attention about politics, and that you should kind of when there's political events, you should observe them and then ask questions about them, and find out what other people are thinking about them. And, and I've done that. As a matter of fact, my very first presidential campaign where something was said that it registered with me was 1948, and it was Truman. And my mother said, Truman's a good man and Dewey's an evil man. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. She thought Dewey, who was the Republican, she was really evil. And my parents were Roosevelt Democrats, as, so many people were, and Truman took over. And then the first one I was really conscious of was 1952. And to my recollection, that's probably one of the first times my parents ever voted Republican, which was Eisenhower, who was a great war hero. And she didn't like Stevenson at all, who was the Democrat, and so I watched it. That was one of the first television experiences I had of watching it, and so the thing about this is that I'm very very conscious that when you have a big shift in you have a really big shift in how we organize information, how we transform information, then this has enormous reverberations in the political world. And you saw that with Roosevelt was the first president to really master radio, and Kennedy in a certain way, but Reagan more than Kennedy really, really comprehended television. He really knew what you could do with television. And then we have, that you have the case that Trump really, really understood social media better than Hillary Clinton did. I mean, he knew. And everybody has it wrong. They think it was because of all these private information accounts that he got on Facebook. It actually wasn't Facebook that he used. It was actually Twitter. One is he's a master of Twitter himself, but the other thing was that they analyzed the intensity of conversations. They had an artificial intelligence program that could just listen to, like 30 million Twitter calls. They could analyze 30 million Twitter calls, and they could say, where's the intensity level about certain topics? And one of them was the open border, that feeling that the U.S. borders weren't protected and people were just pouring in, and that we were being flooded. And that was actually an intensity. And the other one was regulations that were, interfering with people's lives, and the fact that they had no job protection. And so he just picked up on those, and he just started talking about them like he had gone out and just spent hours in a bar listening to what people were talking about. And of course, Hillary wasn't doing any of that. She knew better. She knew better than the voters what they needed, and she was going to educate them and raise them up. And those who
we need to make history and get a woman. Yeah.
Or you're deplorable. You're deplorable if you don't agree with those. So the thing is about this is that I'm totally keyed in to the fact that we need Cloudlandia to expand our business. Okay, and that this is a huge capability. Where I've made the distinction is that I don't have to be the person in my company to actually access Cloudlandia. And what I need to do is just be clear about telling my team what I intend to do with their expanded capabilities with Cloudlandia, because my interest is expanding my mainland capabilities, because that's where all the money is. So what I want is to spend as little time with Cloudlandia, but get the maximum benefit of Cloudlandia to expand my mainland capabilities. Yeah.
That's really what it does come down to. I mean, when you look at the, and this is, I think, the leveling period here, what we're seeing now as all those, if you were to look at the impact, you've kind of very famously hitched your wagon to the microchip. If you say that from the microchip, from your first awareness of Moore's law to today, you have been 100% correct in hitching your wagon to that as the big impact over here. Now, it seems like, and this is what I was kind of wondering here, if we're at a inflection point right now, that there's maybe a new thing, that maybe it's not Moore's law necessarily that's going to be the driver for the next 40 years. And what I mean by that is that if you take all the things that that's really been the core of the digital revolution, right? That everything has gone and been digitized and has gone through what Peter would call that exponential of the all the D's, the 6 D's, digitized, deceptive, disruptive, and then on their way up, that as the exponential curve of the adoption of the impact of digitization has been reached, it almost feels like each of those things, like the big core things that have been disrupted and democratized now through the digitization, have reached sort of the asymptotic peak of the curve of that, where the impact now of Moore's law of doubling every, and it's probably speeding up now, even the doublings.
Actually, it's slowing down right now.
Slowing down, okay.
Because of the heat they haven't solved the heat problem because as you miniaturize microchips and you pack more of them in, it creates tremendous heat problems for the computers. So that there seems to be, they're facing a 4-minute mile for Moore's law. That they've got to switch to something else now, because they've microchips are mainland. They're made out of silicon. I mean, they're made out of hard stuff, and they're pressing the limits of how much heat they can tolerate, because then you just start melting down the inside of a computer through the power that you're generating. But they'll something else will come along. I mean, because it's needed.
But regardless of that, we've reached the functional peak of our ability for it to improve the experience of anything that it's being applied to.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is that we've gone, if you just look at even just music, or you look at digitizing audio files, we've gone from, in my lifetime, vinyl as the way of distributing or recording music to 8 tracks and cassette tapes, where now you've kind of, that first thing started to be disruptive, where now people could tape record music. And, I remember they were talking about that before CDs or MP3s really made a big impact there. People were all concerned about the cassette tape and the pirating of music, back then. But now we've reached what really is kind of the peak level of that, is that every song ever written is available instantly on my Amazon Echo that sits in my kitchen by voice. I can call out, we can conjure any song you want instantly to this device in immersive sound without, but there's the thing about that is that songs are, the actual consumption of a song is basically a mainland experience. A song is experienced in 3.5 minutes of real time.
Mainland time,
taking it in through our ear holes, right? That's the thing. That's the way that we process that information. So the fact that the digitization has gotten us to that point, further speed of that, there's no really functional improvement to that, that Moore's law is going to impact.
Yeah, well, there's just a little side note on that. It seems to me that the growth that we're experiencing in your access of all the music, let's just focus in on music as an experience that used to be very rare and very expensive, and now it's literally unlimited and free,
Yeah.
And it has to do, let's say Alexa, you've got Alexa, and you can, Alexa can get anything you want, but Alexa isn't any good in actually helping you determine what it is that you want.
Right.
In other words, that, to me, having a conversation with you is great, because in the course of an hour-long conversation on our podcast, or even more when we're having lunch, I'm able to work out in my mind the next thing that I really want, because I'm not bouncing it off a universal access brain. I'm I'm really someone who is in an interactive conversation with me. So that to me is a mainland experience.
Yeah.
And not to, since I don't know anything about last night, but if someone in my mind had an opportunity to spend 5 or 6 hours with me conversing, but they were panic-stricken because they didn't have their cell phone, they're kind of deficient on what for me is a fundamental growth skill. Okay,
yeah.
and that is I can have if I got the right partner, I can have a fabulous conversation with the right partner, if they're interactive and, they think about their thinking. And so me to be in the protected from Cloudlandia devices for 5 or 6 hours is actually a great benefit.
Yes, exactly. I get it. I mean, that's really something, but it was just this whole, and that's indicative of anything. I mean, that's the world right now, right? I mean, that just struck me, that dichotomy, that spread of a 10-year-old and a 70-year-old in that same situation, right? That's really that just struck me as that. And, you're absolutely right. But that's the world right now. That's, I mean, that's where we are right now.
Yeah. But it's not where you are.
No, exactly.
But it's really, where I am.
Yeah.
And I consider that advantage. I consider that I know the difference between the two worlds as a huge advantage, because a lot of people, they don't see the distinction between the two worlds. I don't see any, I see both of the worlds as positive, but they're only positive if you know the difference between the two of them.
Yes. But I think most people have been kind of like, at first, the vision that I had where it's like Cloudlandia is really where it all is right now, that everybody's in Cloudlandia. It's that this has overtaken us over the last 20 years like a wave. It's almost like the water level, the immersion of digital has really enveloped us so that it's over our heads, that you almost have to be breathing the Cloudlandia air to function in society. If you go 20 years ago, the first inclinations of it were the AOL discs that were being delivered to everybody's doorstep in every magazine, in all these things that you can see the digital wave just kind of, falling at our feet there, and then everybody kind of dipping their toe in the water with, you've got mail. And that then becoming more and more that all of a sudden we've got our full foot in this digital wave. And, before we know it, we're up to our waist.
Are you there?
And then, we're up to our neck. We're up to our neck by 2005. And then in 2006 and 2007, when the smartphone really came, that was the beginning of everybody being, completely immersed in it now. And we're really there where there's no, I've said it before, this whole idea that the biggest shift was, 20 years ago, daring journalism was, I locked myself in a New York City apartment to see if I could survive for a week with only the internet as my means of communication. And 20 years later, the daring journalism would be, I locked myself in my New York City apartment without the internet to see if I could survive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, that's really that wave, that wave has overcome. So all of that, if you look at that sort of, if we look at everything that can be digitized, right? When music, text went first, right? Because essentially that was how everything was measured. The only way, to communicate or send things by print was by photocopying them. That became a means of distribution or printing. Then when things got digitized, we used to measure the floppy disks that could hold so many pages of text on there, so many bytes of text. And then now it's essentially every piece of written content is available instantly on demand, as long as you know what the title is, along with the contents. All the contents of it have been digitized. So we've reached that sort of, the curve has gone beyond our ability to consume it, because still the only way for us to intake written format is through our eye holes, which are decidedly analog, through our real-time ability to process that data. We can only read one line at a time.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So all of those things, that balance of, and then the same thing with video, everything, you look at Netflix or all of these things, or even Facebook Live now. I mean, you look at just your access to news, has gone from a letter to a long distance phone call to, let's say a distant relative is having a baby, that the news would have to travel by letter or by long distance phone call, or the phone call coming to say they had the baby, and now it's literally, we're live streaming the birth, and you can be right here and experience it in 3D. It's really, so our ability visually and video wise to get that. So that leads me to think, what is this migration, the new microchip, the thing that's going to shape the next 40 years? Because
I think there's actually, you have Moore's law, but the interesting law was Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe was he was one of the early internet guys, and he was Sun Microsystems. He was the founder or he was one of the key people in Sun. I forget what his first name is, Metcalfe. And what Metcalfe's law says is that the economic value of an electronic network, so he was doing, is the number of users squared. Okay, and this is an important law because what it says, let's just use a telephone as an example. One telephone is worthless.
Yes.
But two telephones are really valuable. Okay. And and every phone that you add, once you've added a second one, every one exponentially multiplies the usefulness of the technology. Okay, so you have one squared is 1, but 2 squared is 4, and 3 squared is 9. So, right, and what it means is that when you have number of users who are connected with each other, the possibility of useful communication, useful decisions, useful action goes up exponentially. If you get to 100, then it's 100, it's 100 squared. If you get to 1 million, it's 1 million squared. So my feeling is the real number isn't so much the microchip law, it's actually the interconnection law, and that's Metcalfe's law, which I think what you're really talking about here. And what people are experiencing isn't so much that they're not accessing Moore's law, is that they're they're spending hours disconnected from Metcalfe's law. Is that really, really interesting stuff is being created, and they have a feeling that, that famous thing that Joe Polish talks about, Tom syndrome. They're terrified that they're missing shit.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So that's what you may be tapping on here. I mean, that's what comes to mind when you talk about this panic feeling, that there's this huge exponential activity taking place, but within the Cloudlandia world, because it's the world of exponential connections, and you're just your lonesome self outside of that.
That's really so. You look at that as very, really, and you could argue that we're almost at the top level of that as well, in terms of the connection of people to our world here. That we basically are one, an instant connection away from anybody, and everybody. I mean, that there's no limitation. It's almost like, okay, we're approaching the point where I could distribute a message to everybody. We're at that point where you could,
Yeah. Well, there was a very, sort of a early guy in observing this in the 1960s. But he was a Canadian right here in Toronto, and I actually met him. I spent a lunch with him once. His name was Marshall McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan was watching the impact of television on politics, culture, economics. And he wrote a book called The Gutenberg Galaxy, and he was using the Gutenberg revolution of introducing mass printing into the world, and the impact after about 500 years of that. But now it was switching into a new medium of television, actually. I mean, there were other crossovers like telegraph and telephone and radio and movies, but he was using television as much more of a mass. It seemed to be much more of a mass phenomenon. And he came up with a line, which I think, again, I'd like to add to the conversation here. He says, the medium is the message. So it's not that basically, if you have a sense of panic that you're not connected to the Cloudlandia world, and that the message is that you're not connected. And that's a message about you, that you're not connected. And so if you're looking for meaning in the Cloudlandia world, the meaning is the world itself. There isn't any particular message. It's just that you're either connected to that world or not, and that's a profound message in your mind.
That's interesting. Now, this may seem weird, but I was just watching the Joe Rogan podcast just last week, and his guest was Kevin Smith, the filmmaker, who he recently had a heart attack, and it was about a 20% chance of survival, the doctor told him, while he was going through it. And he was talking about the feeling that he had, but to tell that story, he's talking about that he never understood. His mother had a heart attack several years ago and actually died for about a minute and a half, or was, flatlined for a minute and a half, came back. And he was asking his mother about that sense, like at the end of her life, she felt like she was kind of floating, but she described it as this blissful sense of disconnection, that it was that every care that she had, or every sort of obligation or connection, was, well, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I don't have to think about that or that. It just this blissful conscious sense of disconnection from every care in the world was gone. And that he brought that, as in that conversation, to really think that through. But it was kind of it was just kind of that popped in my head as you were describing.
Well,
that,
here's
the
So here's the thing: is that my feeling is that day to day, minute to minute, actually, our brain probably collects concerns and fears, and and there's a buildup of this, and my feeling is that a lot of it has to do with the fact that you don't have very much time,
Yeah.
And that's a big concern of a lot of people, is that they don't have very much time, and that time is running out, and that things around them are speeding up, and that there could be real dangers in you running out of time and there not being very much time and the world speeding up around you. And there isn't anything else except the water that you as a fish are swimming in, so you don't have any comprehension. And what she got for a minute and a half is, wow, there's another way to experience this, and this minute and a half I'm having in this other realm tells me I don't have to worry. And I've read a lot about people, because she had a near-death experience, I mean, she was physically dead as far as all the instruments around her, but she wasn't, because she was conscious. And then she came back, and now she has this tremendous difference between one world and another. And what I've heard from all the surveys of people who have had this experience, they never fear death again. They get really easy.
That's what Kevin said about, even that was the point that he was, because Joe was asking Kevin about, like, what was that like as you're like facing this potential imminent death here. And he said, it was really, it struck back to that conversation that he had with his mom, that he wasn't fearing it. He wasn't like, he had that sense of that he could have very potentially had, that could have been the end, and he was okay with that. He got the thing that everybody is promised, which is a lifetime. And that's an interesting thing, that was what that was. Not, there's no set amount, but you had whatever it was. He's 47 years old. That is, up until this point, it's been a lifetime. And if that was it, that was it, And so it was really kind of it's just an interesting conversation that fits with kind of what you were saying there.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you don't even have to have that extreme, close to, not being here experience. Both his mother, who was actually, measured as not being here in a certain way, and then he was very close to it. But I remember an interview with Mark Wahlberg, the actor, and so he had been on September 9/11. So on September 10th in 2001, he was in Toronto for the International Film Festival. Okay, and staying at I guess the Four Seasons, the old Four Seasons, and he was supposed to take a flight back, very late flight back from Toronto to Boston, and then catch a very early morning flight the next morning to LA. And so he went back to his hotel, but he was really, he had just drunk too much. And instead of packing and leaving his room, he fell asleep on the bed, and he missed his flight to Boston, missing the Los Angeles flight, which actually crashed into the World Trade Center the next morning.
Wow.
And so he said the moment it happened, and he said I was watching on television. He says I realized that because of my not being able to make the flight to Boston the night before, I was now on bonus time. He says what I did is I just reinterpreted this whole thing that the rest of my life is just bonus time. He said I was just given a bonus. I was just given an extension, and he said and he's talked about this in subsequent interviews, and he's talked about this that his whole sense that he's missing stuff or that his life is deficient has just disappeared simply because, and that was just he did that conceptually. I mean, it wasn't an actual experience, but it was just conceptually.
No, I get it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting, this thing of being able to conceive another world. So I said that my next book is printed, but the book for September I've just completed all the interviews that produces the text for the interviews. So I just completed that 3 days ago, and one of the things I've said, I've been 31 years with this thought that I'm going to live to 156, and anyone who's heard me talk over the years knows that I have this thought experiment, which I started in 1987, so I've been at it for 31 years, and I can't think of any of, I think about my lifetime, and immediately I think of 156, and the three things it's left me with at age 74 is that I've got a massive amount of time left. The other thing is that I've got time for everything I want to do. And the other thing is that time is slowing down. What I've noticed that the year between my 73rd and 74th birthday, so it was just a couple of weeks ago, I was 74, actually was the slowest year I can remember. It just seemed to amble along, the last year. And what it's allowed me to do is so much to notice how other 70-year-olds aren't thinking that way that I talk to, and that people much younger than me have a time urgency that I really don't. I've got time for everything I want to do, but I'm doing far more than I've ever done, mainly because I'm taking advantage of skilled people who can take advantage of Cloudlandia. So my mainland time seems to be slowing down, but my use of Cloudlandia is actually speeding up. This project you and I are doing. And so my impact is going way up, but my actual mainland experience is that time is actually slowing down.
I mean, that is fascinating, because you're able to, this is where I was thinking with this, that it's this, if we take Metcalfe's law we have instant access to all of the users, basically. I mean, we're at the point where all of the people that are that we're trying to impact are already fully immersed in that, right? That it's not like even 10 or 15 years ago where not all the entrepreneurs were really online or that way. But it's to the point now where almost everybody. We're not waiting for you talk about the 2 billion more people that are going to be coming online. Those aren't the 2 billion entrepreneurs that are coming online right now. That's everybody else. It's everybody coming online. And so to be able to instantly tap into that, it really is that I think that our brains are struggling with this transition to realizing that we don't have to try so hard in a way, almost. It's almost counterintuitive the way I'm sensing it, that we've got access to everybody. And I think about other things.
Dean, we've got to stop applying ourselves.
Yes, that's exactly it. I think you're absolutely right. That it's like, you think about this level of, we can't imagine the impact of, electricity. That still has struck me when you opened up Peter Diamandis' Abundance event a few years ago, talking about in 1915 how electricity was just starting to make its way through the United States, through the world. And now we look at it that we just take electricity for granted, that we don't even give it a conscious thought. Just like we're getting to that point with Wi-Fi and Cloudlandia, right? That it's all these things that it's getting to that point now where all of that stuff, we're able to summon or conjure all these things, anything you can imagine. I think I'm on the verge of, it's right on the tip of my tongue here, Dan, that right now we're at a point where anything that has already been imagined and made real in history is immediately conjurable from the cloud to us right now.
Yeah, everything that's been captured, that's been captured in some way. Actually, it's very, very interesting what that actually does to our thinking. We just have a phenomenally greater notion of what happened before us. And I was thinking about that. There was a little recording. I just tapped into it I'm trying to think who the first one. I think it was the 1870s. Harrison, or one of the very forgettable presidents who existed before the there was a whole slew of them between Lincoln before you get up to Teddy Roosevelt. 40 years, and none of them. People say, he's not a very important president. I said, that's the majority of them.
Yeah, right.
There's just a few mountain peaks that really stick out, which kind of shows you the country runs regardless whether it's got a good president or not. But the interesting thing, he was the first one recorded, and then they started recording them. You would get little 2-minute or 3-minute or 5-minute speeches. And one of the things that I really noticed is right up until Roosevelt, everybody had a high-pitched voice. All the presidents had high-pitched voice. It was very, 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 very high, almost very uncomfortable for us to listen to them. And then Roosevelt had polio. And he was in a wheelchair, and they very cleverly, because they would never have him photographed or filmed in a wheelchair. So he had to develop tremendous upper body strength, but he had to work on his, on his chest muscles so that he could breathe properly. And so consequently, he had this very sort of deep voice. And then all of a sudden, you notice that politicians, their whole voices start to drop back down because he had established a new sound standard.
The presidential sound.
Yeah, this presidential sound. And then generally, and the reason is because, throughout history, nobody ever knew what somebody who was dead sounded like, but now we do. Somebody who lived 100 years ago, we didn't know what they sounded like, and now we do.
Right.
And it changes our thinking about what sounds right.
Yeah, this is, You're absolutely right. You think about that, like, imagine just what a gift this is to be living right now. When you look at this, even taking this into the future of, and I said this to Joe Polish when we first started doing I Love Marketing, that to think back, like how much of how much we would treasure now if we could have, if Claude Hopkins and Albert Lasker, two of the like great marketing pioneers of the turn of the century in the 1900s, were to have a weekly discussion for an hour where they got together and talked about marketing and all the things they're discovering, how much we would treasure that now, but we never had that opportunity, and that was something that I said to Joe, like thinking forward 100 years, what that's going to look like, being able to, being able to access that, our conversations. It's kind of a cool.
I think the big thing is either a good thing or it's a cause for distress.
Right.
And I was just framing a question about, kind of one of my filters of whether I'm going to interact with Cloudlandia or not. Yeah. And the question is, what use are the users? In other words, I will use the users if I can figure out a use for them, but otherwise I'm not going near it.
Right.
So it's my created intentionality which makes the users user. There is no use for them in sort of, unless I determine there's a use. There's no use unless I have consciously determined what the use is. And I noticed, when I was in London this time, I did a marketing presentation to people who hadn't really been in contact with Strategic Coach before. And virtually everyone who came up to me afterwards and said, I listened to all your podcasts, 3 or 4 mentioned the podcast that we're doing together. Yeah. And this is an entirely new reality from, let's say, 3 years ago. Then it was just Joe. It was my 10 times talk with Joe.
Right.
You had I Love Marketing. You had I Love Marketing. But now I've got 8 podcast series, and each of them, are doing 3,000 to 5,000 a month. But gee, that's phenomenal. Where if I wanted to talk to 3,000 to 5,000 people a month 20 years ago, I'd have to be on the road all the time talking to live audiences.
Right. Yeah. Wow. It's, it is really, I'm just really thinking now about where that this is really reaching the new normal here now. Mm-hmm. And what's the thing for the next 20 years that's going to, how are we all going to adjust to that? Because I think we're reaching the point where people are going to just give in and realize that we can't consume it all. You're going to miss shit all the time. There's your ability to keep up with it is gone, right? Yeah.
I want to tell you, and I'm not sure how this relates, but we're getting near the close off here.
Oh, that went fast.
So I was doing a podcast with Peter Diamandis maybe about 3 months ago, and he brought up the whole point of having artificial intelligence in your house, so where the house actually senses you and everything. You walk into a room and immediately the conditions of the room are created because you predetermined that you like the room like this, and it's constantly learning from you. And he says, this is really coming, very, very quickly. People are going to do this. And I said, okay. I said, here's a test. I said, you hang out with some of the wealthiest, most technological, savvy people in the world, and you've been to their homes. So are they actually using all these capabilities in their homes, like the Zuckerbergs or the Pages that, or Elon Musk or anything? And he was stopped, and he said, well, as a matter of fact, no, they're not. He said their homes are just normal. And I said, why do you think that is? I mean, it's not even an action. I mean, it doesn't require any of their time to get that. They can hire the greatest people in the world. They have access to the greatest technology. And any check that it would require to pay and install that stuff, they would. But they don't. Why don't they? And he says, gee, I'd never thought about that before, that they actually don't. And I says, well, maybe they need a break.
I think in a lot of ways, though, that I think that I would have asked Peter a follow-up question, because I think Peter's definition of normal is very different. Like, I look at, for me, I totally get what he's saying, because I'm surrounded right now when I walk into my home. We have a Nest thermostat system where it learned my temperature patterns over a period of time, and it automatically adjusts the temperature that, it, when I'm not home, it keeps it up, it lets the maximum temperature get to 74. When I'm home in the evening, it sets it to 72, and then about 9 o'clock, it starts getting it down to 70 and keeps it at 68 overnight, and then turns it back up again in the morning. I never have to touch the thermostat, and it's learned to adapt with that. I look at my Amazon Echo that I keep in the kitchen, that I'm starting to observe myself that I'm using it for any music that I ever want. I mean, I can call out and have whatever song is on my mind. Often we'll have a situation where I'll sit in the kitchen with, I've got like a little Starbucks kind of area set up in my kitchen with some lounge chairs, and we'll sit there and have spend a little bit of time and have conversation with somebody, but go back and forth and have them. We'll create a playlist as we're socializing, kind of thing, right? That will summon up the next song and talk about the why that song. Or I'm recognizing that in sitting in the living room connected to the kitchen, that we'll watch a movie and see somebody on there and want to know something about that. Like I saw Alan Alda was on a show that we were watching, and to be able to call out and say, Alexa, how old is Alan Alda? And from the cloud, from nowhere, comes Alan Alda's 84 years old. Like, to just have instant access to everything, that I think that the new normal has become so normal that we don't even think of it as creating or living in an adaptive environment.
Dean, I have to say something. I just got really a sense of urgency about something. But when you're in, like, I'm going to see you in 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to hook a tether to you from you to me, so that if you get, too far into Cloudlandia, you'll have a way of getting back.
I love that. I mean, that's the value of having this, like, this bright shining beacon in my calendar. It's like the signal to come back to the base, Yeah. Maybe
our podcast is the tether. It's actually a tether, so that
it really is. But
yeah. I think you're much more of an explorer here than I am. I mean, I'm I mean, I was early into it, as you mentioned, with the microchip. So it's been 45 years that I've been convinced that we're in this transformation.
Yeah, and you were right.
It was a conceptual shift in my mind, what to look for and what to listen out to. But I kind of am a mainline kind of guy who has learned how to get the best of the value from the Cloudlandia, and more it's layers and layers of human teamwork between me and the actual Cloudlandia capabilities.
Yeah,
and it suits me. I mean, it suits me.
Absolutely.
I feel terrific about it. But it's a fascinating conversation, and again, like the who, not how structure, this got created only because we decided to examine procrastination and why procrastination happens. So one thing I'd like to do in upcoming is just very quickly to go through the 8 mindsets that make up the scorecard. That everybody procrastinates. It's a good thing that they do. It's triggered by their ambition, and it's procrastination is an indication that you're being challenged to grow in terms of your understanding and your capabilities. So we cover all of them just to very, very quickly to see where each of us is with them, and just to talk about what we've learned about them and
I think
everything.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, everything. I mean, I'm not committing to any particular one, but sometime in the next 4 or 5, we would maybe in July, because that'll be the 2-year. It'll be the 2-year
perfect.
anniversary.
I agree. That would be perfect.
Yeah, but the thing is, the one thing that's emerged is that I've lost all guilt about procrastination.
Me too. It's not even an issue.
I've lost all guilt about procrastination, and at the same time, I've expanded my appreciation of procrastination. So I think that's a pretty good payoff for just deciding to go deep on something.
Yes, I love it.
All right.
Well, this is great. I'm so excited. I'm going to be. I will see you
when do you leave for London?
Saturday.
When do you leave? You leave for London on Saturday. Yeah, and then you're back.
I leave for Toronto on Friday. This Friday.
Right. This Friday.
So hopefully, if you're around, I'll see you on Saturday. And I know we have our regularly scheduled Jacques, but I'm hoping we can get 2 in while I'm there.
Yeah, well, I'll just schedule it, and I'll see you on Saturday at. I'll be there a little after 11, but 11:30 is when they're officially open. So I'll see you then.
Perfect. All right, Dan.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.